Hey, welcome to Driving Leadership. I'm Bill Berthel, and you might recognize my voice from the audio podcast that we started about 2 years ago. We had the idea of doing this video format just before the pandemic started. And getting into a car with someone to do a video, well, that wasn't going to work with the pandemic. So we decided we would do the audio. So there's 2 years worth of audio podcasts to listen to where I get to have a conversation with a leader to understand more about their story of leadership, what motivates them, what drives them to lead, pun intended, driving leadership. I'm really interested in understanding why leaders lead and what they do, what drives them, where their passions are. We also get to learn more about the diversity of leadership here in Central New York. Believe it or not, Central New York is full of amazing organizations and leaders, and we're kind of a hidden gem. We really are here in Central New York. So what you can expect on Driving Leadership video format is a car ride with a leader, a conversation about what motivates them and drives them to lead, and equally as important, some stories about their organizations, the challenges they might have in leadership, and what they're doing to develop as leaders. So now that we're video format, I thought what better way for our first video of Driving Leadership than to invite my business partner and the founding partner of Emergent, Ralph Simone. So Ralph, thanks for being on Driving Leadership. I thought, what a better way for our first video format episode to be with my business partner and the founding partner of Emergent, Ralph Simone. Thank you for being here, man.
Well, this is fun. I mean, we've been talking about doing this for, quite a long time, and I'm really excited to be part of the maiden voyage, so to speak.
So I want to believe it's a good omen that we have poor weather for this, but we're going to make the best of it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we got to be used to poor weather, right? In Syracuse, right? Willis, I worked for Carrier Corporation. My first job ever, and Willis Carrier said, "You bring your weather with you."
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So hopefully I'll bring some good weather with us on this drive today.
There we go. So Ralph, tell me a little bit about your leadership path, your leadership story.
So it's a great question, and one I don't often reflect on, but there's probably three or four major things I think shaped my leadership journey, and they started early. So I was a paper boy, and 12 years old, had big root, a lot of responsibility. I was a grocery store clerk, which is where I really think I honed my social awareness skills around emotional intelligence. And I was also a resident assistant in college. A leadership role where you're responsible for, kind of providing the right environment and guidance for the, all the students in your dorm.
Well, and all three of those roles are opportunity of service, aren't they?
I think so, and I think that's probably the common thread. And so even, in my first professional job, I was attracted to service. Even Carrier, that wasn't my first job, but a job as being a foreman at a very young age was also really an interesting part of my leadership journey, because I learned that you needed to rely on other people. I mean, I'm not the handiest guy around, supervising, 40 men who were probably closer to my age now, building these large, complicated chillers. It was just amazing. You needed to learn what everybody did well and rely on their unique skill sets to get the job done.
So I love it. I've known you for quite a while. I've been working with you for about 6 years, and I haven't really heard that story yet, right? So there's something about getting behind the windshield. That was part of the vision of Driving Leadership, was to be behind the windshield, little windshield talk, because there's something about conversation in a vehicle, isn't there?
No question, and you probably have heard the one this is where my kids would feel most open to dropping a bomb on me
In the car.
in the car.
Yeah,
And maybe it's because there is not eye contact if the driver is really paying attention. And I remember fondly, I say drop a bomb, but I remember fondly the rides with my son back and forth to karate. It was very quiet, and all of a sudden he would come up with something that he was either excited about or that was troubling him. So I think there is something about being in the car that it's like a safe zone.
That's awesome. So I know your story and how you got into the space of consulting and coaching, but share it with our listeners. Tell us about before Emergent.
Well, it's interesting. Before Emergent, and this is why maybe I have such a passion for employee development and people taking responsibility for their own development. So I talked about my former job at Carrier. I was also in a manufacturing systems job where I was doing programming, and I hated it. And I remember going to my boss's boss at the time, who was the plant manager, and saying, I'm looking for I'm going to find another job, and I'd like your help.
Yes.
I wasn't putting him on notice, wasn't warning him, but I just realized I was in a job that wasn't my passion. It wasn't my wheelhouse. It wasn't a job where I thought I could contribute at my fullest potential. And so I took the initiative to have this conversation, and that's when I became the first manager for quality performance at Carrier. And that was really my first step into a role of an internal trainer, consultant, and coach. And that's from there. I left 3 years later to join Coopers & Lybrand to learn the business side of consulting, and then in 1991 I decided, no time like the present to see if I can make a go of this. So here we are, 31 years later, a number of versions of organizations, but all with really the focus of developing leaders, teams, and organizations to perform at their highest potential.
And make a go of it meant no longer working as a corporate trainer, corporate coach, but in business for yourself and with others.
Correct. Yeah. And then there's the Emergent story, I think is most exciting because we rebranded, and one of the things that I'm really excited about is we partnered with an organization, MPW, and they got the name right, because when you look up what Emergent means, it really stands for what I've always been interested in doing is it's guiding people to come into being, to guide people to create the right conditions, to create the space to share the practices that will allow them to step further into their potential and innate greatness. And I mean, they couldn't have got the name better. And so that's the Emergent story. And we have regional focus. We are really committed to raising both the consciousness, which is the awareness, and the performance of leaders, teams, and organizations in this region and beyond. I guess what we recognized with technology and with writing and with programs like this, we can reach a broader audience with our message, and that's exciting.
We can. I mean, Central New York and Syracuse is home, and we're passionate here, and there's so many great organizations and leaders. But in today's world, we can reach beyond our own neighborhoods. And let's talk a little bit about this topic of practice. I know we're both pretty passionate about the idea of practicing leadership, and you had a recent experience, I think, with pay attention where I'm going here, a client that made you, I think a little differently, reframe this idea of practice.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that became really apparent to me is we sometimes kick around these terms around leadership development and leadership as practice without really thinking more deeply about them. So I was working with a law firm, the top 20 lawyers from a very large law firm, national law firm.
Yeah.
And one of the guys I had worked with over 15 years ago. And, he very passionately in the session said, when we went to law school so that we could practice law.
Right.
Not so we could practice leadership.
Right.
And it occurred to me that leadership is a practice in and of itself.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we're trying to do it part-time, or we're trying to add it on or attach to something. Now, I do think, there's both and, right? We can be practicing our trade of law or of engineering, of design, while also acting on the systems and developing the people that allow us to sustain and scale that over time. So I don't think it has to be an either or proposition, but I mean it speaks to what Malcolm Gladwell would talk about is 10,000 hours, and while we might and others might argue that you don't necessarily need 10,000 hours, you do need to be intentional about the practice of leadership.
That's great. It reminds me of, well, I was raised by a lawyer. So my mother was an attorney, and as a kid, I was always looking for a great lawyer joke to just try and make her giggle. Maybe she was pretty. I'll use the wrong use of the word stoic, but she was a very stoic woman. It was hard to make her laugh, so I was always looking for a good lawyer joke. And my favorite one was, hey mom, when are you going to stop practicing law and get it right? It's not about right.
No,
It's not about right. The space, whether it's an attorney, whether it's a doctor, it's a constant evolution and change in these dynamic fields, just like leadership. It's a practice.
Well, it's continuous improvement.
Yes.
And I think whether we're in medicine or law or consulting or leadership development, we need to be continuous learners. I mean,
Yes.
we talk about, leaders are learners, and what are we learning in the area that we've chosen to practice that will make us better each and every day. And I think that's the exciting part, but it does take intention. It does take focus. We need to make this practice of leadership and leadership development one of the essential things that we take on in our day-to-day lives.
Not at all to suggest sacrificing accountability, but to understand that practicing means not having to get it perfect or not having to get it right every time can be really liberating.
Oh, I mean, we use a word a lot, and I started using this with my kids, was this experiment.
Yeah.
Experimenting, because the worst thing that can happen is that you get paralyzed by perfection.
Yes.
And, anytime you do something for the first time, including leading, including designing, I can imagine when somebody, was arguing their first case.
Sure.
Part of the magic is in learning from some things that didn't go well.
Absolutely.
This idea of the growth mindset. I mean, I think we like to provide the space for people to grow and develop. But one of the best ways that you grow and develop are by being in the game,
Absolutely.
by experimenting with behaviors and learning what works and learning what doesn't work. This is the north side, actually, so my family grew up on the north side.
Is that right?
We'd actually passed a top store on Pond Street,
Yeah.
and that originally was a Wegmans. So
No kidding.
that was one of, I don't know if it was the first Wegmans store in Onondaga County. Closed. I was glad. I haven't been by there in a while. I was glad to see that something opened up so that part of the community is served.
That's fantastic.
So this is North Salina Street. We're now passing the former location of Aunt Josie's. I mean, it's still there, but closed. Aunt Josie's was a famous North Side Italian restaurant, which my mother grew up, I think, with the with near Aunt Josie. A friend of hers was friend of hers aunt was Aunt Josie, and she actually had the sauce before it made it
That's awesome.
to the restaurant. Yeah, or at least that's how she tells the story.
Sure. I'm sure she did have the sauce. I bet she did. Yeah.